Well, hey, good morning, everyone. This is the Bird is the Word series. My name's Ahmed. I'm co-founder of Locum during the week and a respiratory SHO over the weekends. But less about me. More importantly, we've got Dr. Gilbert Greenall, CBE, MBA, doctor, humanitarian hero, and advisor to the UK government and the UN with me. So in this series, we're hopefully going to talk through all things doctoring, portfolio careering, and, well, in this episode specifically, Gilbert's incredible kind of career path and where he's got today. So I'd like to say welcome, Gilbert. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
No, absolute pleasure. So, Gilbert, I mean, the people that are watching this will be very much like me in this position where doctor by training, went to med school, started doing foundation training, and were on the path to being either a consultant or a GP or going into research. But something happened and a spark triggered where we decided that we didn't want to go down that route and we wanted to do multiple things. And the year I left my full-time training, which was I think 2016 now, not too long ago, 55% of my colleagues also left to go into either do FY3s, 4 or 5s, go into business schools, travel the world, etc. when traveling was acceptable. So it's still increasingly kind of prevalent across the UK. So I just wanted to ask you kind of what led you to leave full-time medicine, so to speak, although I do appreciate your journey to medicine wasn't as straightforward as mine and many others.
I think the biggest problem I found was that I never felt that after I qualified that I was ever going to make a really brilliant doctor. I could, it's a question of plodding along and being competent. I used to think in accident emergency medicine, you're like a 200 hoop poodle. You could jump through 200 hoops quite easily because they were things that appeared every day. And there were then the others. But I didn't feel that after doing it for 2 years, I didn't really have there's something about it that I didn't think was going to be my strongest suit. Now, I think if you want to change, there are 2 things that come to mind. First of all, it's a confidence issue. If you're a doctor, you're in the top decile of intelligent people in the country, just by definition. And that means that you can fly Concorde, you can do anything. It doesn't really, if you apply yourself, you can do it. And it's just a question of opening your mind and doing that. But of course, for most people, there is a financial risk. You look at the stage and your age and where you are, and you might have got a mortgage, you might have financial considerations to make. And if you jump from one job into another, that nice little safety blanket isn't going to be with you. So I think for some people, the intellectual one's easy enough. That's just for most doctors. We can be arrogant so-and-sos anyway. So we're normally quite keen on just reassuring ourselves we're quite clever. That probably isn't the problem. The financial one is much more difficult because you've got to make that plunge. I think those are the 2. Then it's the third is your appetite for risk. Are you a person that is able to just get up one morning and say, I've done this for a few years, I'm now going to do something completely different, and I'm just going to be just as good at that as what or not, if not better.
Yeah, we'll talk about risk appetite. I mean, yours is probably at one extreme of the spectrum that most of us couldn't even compare to. But I mean, your path to medicine wasn't as straightforward as kind of sixth form university medicine. You were in the military initially, and then ended up in Fontainebleau in France at INSEAD, and then it was medicine. So I guess to go back on my question, it's what stimulated you to get into medicine in the first place after what is already a very diverse career?
I think quite easily. It was, I went in the army because that was something a lot of my generation did after leaving school. And then I was meant to join a family company. And at the end of the training period, I said I wanted to go to business school. I went to INSEAD, And at INSEAD, I became much more rebellious. I became interested in things that was just not very straightforward. A lot of work with multinational companies in developing countries, power and resource policy, mining in the developing world. And less and less did I see myself as a sort of corporate warrior. So I, by chance, got involved in a humanitarian operation on the Thai-Cambodian border. And after my second one in Uganda, 80-81, after the fall of Idi Amin, I thought I want to pull the focus down from 100 units of 100,000 to 1-to-1, and medicine was the obvious place to do that. And so off I went to medical school, qualified, but I hadn't been qualified more than 10 minutes when it was the first Gulf War, and I was called up by the army again and ended up as the advisor to 3 Commando Brigade. So to move 500,000 people off the mountains in Kurdistan. So it was really the attempt to go 1-to-1 was sort of partially successful, but it turned out I was much better at the units for 100,000. So it was just which degree of focus do you want?
Yeah, no, that's thanks, Gilbert. I mean, I guess I find myself now kind of halfway between the, as you describe it, a corporate warrior in the sense which doesn't kind of sit too well, and also the kind of 1-to-1 medic. I'm spending my weekends on the respiratory wards, which are now, busy with, so I get that kind of 1-to-1 fix, and during the week we have the 1-to-many. But going back to INSEAD, I mean, INSEAD is still, I would guess, probably the most respected MBA kind of business school across the world. I mean, I'm sure it varies between Harvard and Stanford and Wharton and whatnot. But would you, for a lot of doctors who are kind of going through the training now and they're in the mindset of the grass is greener on the other side, which it may or may not be the case, that there are pros and cons of everything in life. Would you recommend the MBA, not specifically at INSEAD, although I'm sure you'll reference it, but would you recommend an MBA as a stepping stone to outside medicine world?
Yes, definitely, because it reduces risk, because if you've got an MBA, you are trained into the middle cadre of multinational companies. There is, you are taking away that sort of abyss which you might have if you didn't. So it mitigates risk on one hand, but for what it did for me was, at INSEAD particularly, you can do anything. And we were constantly, it's a very elitist school, and it said, you are the leaders of Europe. You when you leave here, you're going to take up one of these really big jobs out there, and which is, I'd never come across this, and it built up my confidence to believe that actually, if you can get through that MBA course, you probably can do anything. And I think too many of us have this inner doubt that we can, and I think it takes something, a stimulus like an MBA course, to release that.
No, that's good to know, because on the kind of the Facebook forums, you get a lot of kind of keyboard warriors who are very opinionated one way or the other in this, and some say it's a total waste of time, and some say it's the best thing on the planet. But it's nice to get kind of a real kind of first-person perspective on this. Just silencing my phone.
Sure.
So I'd like to kind of, you mentioned Kurdistan, and I'm going to go back to this. I've read your book, which is an excellent book, but I'm going back to this because I, by blood, from the country that you called the, quote, crucible of chaos, end quote, which is modern Iraq. And I spent my medical elective up in Kurdistan. I spent it in a psychiatric unit in Erbil in the summer of, I think it was 2013, so just before Daesh, ISIS kind of came into the picture. There was a bit of stability back then, which is rare for Iraq as a country. And you were very, very heavily involved in almost, I feel pretty confident saying this, creating the Kurdish state. I mean, the mission was kind of Operation Safe Haven, as you put it together. And the reason I mention this is that people will start watching this, if they join late, will start thinking, well, why the hell are these guys talking about kind of Kurdistan in Iraq? But as part of that mission, so to speak, you worked with multiple NGOs multiple private organizations, dare I say multiple governments back then at the time, or pseudo governments, to work together to create one, or to have one shared goal in mind. And I bring this up selfishly, potentially, because of the work at Locum's Nest. And the NHS is National Health Service. N is national, implies kind of one entity. But you know as well as I do that multiple NHS organizations often compete with one another, which is mostly healthy competition. But you also know as well as I do, it's very difficult for a doctor or a nurse or somebody to work across multiple NHS organizations without having to jump through, 53 kind of hoops to be able to work and provide our expertise and our services. Are there any kind of shared lessons learned that you've experienced from dealing with what is an infinitely more difficult challenge to get organizations to work together that we could kind of copy and paste into the NHS to get NHS Trust to work with one another as a shared kind of organization for the better of the healthcare system in this country?
Well, I think the first thing is that with any of these highly complex organizations and situations you're in, when you look at it, it's analysis. And when going back to INSEAD, it was analysis. Out of the 365 really interesting things that are going on here, what are the 5 that are important and what are the 3 that are critical? And that was it's been with me all my life. And that was one of the greatest gifts from INSEAD, is to be able to read all those hateful case histories, hundreds of pages of stuff, what you've got to do in 48 hours, and come to the classroom and present your ideas on it. So it's that analysis of the problem. And then once you've got that, the intellectual high ground, what is the plan? And what you see so often is just chaos. Nobody's got a plan. There's lots of people running around with half a plan or a bit of a plan. But you've got to hold the intellectual high ground. Once you can say, it's these 3 things, and it's going to be done in this way, people say, my goodness me, of course it should be like that. And then you can build through your diplomatic skills, the consensus. You've got to build that consensus. The difficulty sometimes when the consensus, you arrive and the consensus is wrong. Now that's a very difficult thing to overturn. And you have to remember that individuals these days have remarkably little power because everything is decided at committee. There are very few Napoleons around who can give the great word of command and it's all going to happen. And you're faced with committees that have very strong views, and it's been made by a group of people, and for one individual to overturn requires considerable care and diplomatic effort to build an alternative power base to overthrow a bad idea. But having, I think it's been really easier on the whole, because normally where I've been working, there isn't a plan. And I've been able to get that plan together and then build the consensus for it, and then get each component, each NGO, each national government to lend their hand on the oar to pull it together. So it's been it's a very personal thing, that diplomatic skill, because not only you've got to have a plan, but then you've got to run around and at one-to-one and sell this plan until you can get a result.
Yeah, no, I guess you're almost kind of describing rewriting the script as infinitely more difficult than writing the script for others to follow. And you're probably right on this one. So I guess for us, it's finding those trust leaders and organization leaders that are Napoleon-esque to a certain degree, but kind of conform within the rules so they don't get banished away. But that's fascinating insight, Gilbert. Thank you.
And just to say, with the UN, I mean, some organisations are so process-driven, and I suspect the NHS is one of those. And when you've got process and it's producing nonsense, it is damn hard to tackle that, because that process is written into endless memorandum and memoranda and the rest of it.
I'm sure you're right. And I do have to say, the NHS, I mean, since day one, we were taught it operates best at times of crisis. And I have to say, it's the vaccination rollouts and everything else has been a phenomenal response. So when everything is on the right path and the script is written well, it is an incredible machine. But it's, I guess it's at those times when it's almost status quo, and when you start to think what can be improved from not necessarily this decade, but a few decades ago, that's when the challenges of the committees and the incorrect paths kind of become apparent.
Well, there's just one point I could add to that, is that in the military, there's a thing called a fragmentation order, which a general can give out, which goes down the whole chain of command, down to the last chap sitting in a little trench somewhere. And it's a fantastic thing, because if you know how, when I was working in a military quarters, I would know how to get effect from the divisional headquarters right down to the last man or woman on the front line. And that was an incredible cascade effect, and could achieve enormous things in a very short space of time.
Yeah, no, that's I guess.
You want to distribute 50,000 tents in 10 days, that was the way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that sort of kind of transparency is key to that, and just being aware of how to do things. And you know, you've got so many kind of fascinating stories that you wrote in your book, which I'd recommend, and I will share it kind of after we publish this interview for sure. One thing I do want to ask, and I'm conscious of time, you are still a practicing doctor, and you've maintained your career as a kind of SHO for life, which is where I think I will end up personally with whatever kind of pathway I go down. How, you know, I'm still kind of finding my feet, and I'm learning about what needs to be done here and there to maintain this and that with my license to practice, and kind of keeping safe and on top of medicine, which is forever changing. My textbooks that I had in Sheffield, you know, 10 years ago are almost worthless now, other than they look great on a bookshelf. How, I mean, what advice do you give to fellow colleagues who are kind of wanting to just maintain, you know, working 5-10 shifts a month, moving forward? How do you keep on top of medicine?
Well,
SHO.
I think the first important quality is humility, because when you're, you know, when I was in my late 50s, still as an SHO, there are two problems. First of all, it's people expect you to have much more knowledge than you do. So you've got to be a master at the reverse delegation, going up to someone who's significantly younger than you and your senior and saying, cubicle 6, the collies. In fact, and going and getting them, the registrar, to go and do something which you think, that might be a bit tricky. So, and not, because people will always think you have more experience than you do, and not be sucked into doing things that you shouldn't be doing because you don't have the experience to do. And also, I've done training courses, and they've all been straight out of university, and I'm there 20, 30 years older than them. So you need that humility and the ability to laugh at yourself and not feel humiliated by the fact that you are really a very lowly person in the chain of command, and concentrate on what you can do well. And to me, that was always a doctor-patient relationship, because you've got, I always thought with accident and emergency medicine, people come in anxious. That's their presenting complaint. They think something dreadful is going to happen to them. You know that it probably isn't. And and if they still go out, you give them the correct treatment, and they still go out anxious, they've still got their presenting complaint. So you've got to make sure that they believe they've got the right treatment too.
Of course, and no, I you know, totally kind of echo that sentiment. It's I think it's, you know, balancing humility, which is probably the most important thing, you know, and kind of on the day-to-day running is when to know to ask for help, because that's probably the most important thing right up to kind of consultant level medicine. You know, it's knowing your limits. But I guess it goes back to the kind of your art of diplomacy quote of just being a pleasant person to work with and a pleasant person to deal with the patients. And the courses, you know, I've been through very similar things as of the last year. I froze my license to practice when kind of Locum's Nest really picked up and started getting traction. I reinstated it properly kind of just before the onset of the pandemic to go back onto the wards. And, you know, it was thrown into the deep end with courses and advanced life support and all of the things that you wanted to do yourself to feel safe. But back on the wards, you know, for me at least, it was kind of immediately reassured by colleagues that you know, they welcome you. But for me, it was kind of knowing when to ask for help, knowing what I am useful at and am kind of good at, and just knowing my limitations. I think it's that humility. You're spot on.
And there was that lovely thing, the most wonderful lesson at medical school was told, never guess, just say you don't know. And I think it's just such a lovely thing to be able to be completely free to do and say, I just don't know.
Yeah. It's okay to not know. I think, you know, with everything in life, let alone, you know, healthcare. But Gilbert, we wanted to keep these series really kind of short and snappy, given people have really limited time. I'd love to catch up once we've stopped this recording. But I want to say thank you again very much on behalf of kind of me, Ellie, the Bird is the Word team, and the whole of Locum's Nest, and the doctors using the platform. And, you know, I will do this because it's a dumb thing, but this is the book, Combat Civilian, Gilbert Greenall, for all those watching. Incredible book on Amazon. Thoroughly recommend it for any doctors, anybody that's interested in kind of geopolitics and humanitarian work across the world, really. Gilbert, thank you.